In this video, I spent 100 days exploring the oldest anarchy server on Minecraft, 2x2t, and to keep it interesting, I gave myself a list of challenges to complete by the end of the video. So without further ado, enjoy. On day 1, it was my first time playing 2x2t, and I've only seen a couple of VMC videos, but not any actual gameplay. I watched the sun set, then almost stumbled into a hole where I could see bedrock from the top. Using F3 to look at my coordinates, I found which direction would lead me away from 0, 0, and I looked around my surroundings by using FreeCam. After looking around for a bit, I continued down the path, and found a weird obsidian structure flowing with lava. I decided to look below and found that there was nothing below me, and I continued down the path. Eventually, the path was broken, but after getting through it, I continued to walk. I made it to the point where the path ended, but I was still surrounded by cobblestone. Even though I was surrounded, there was still kind of a path to follow, so I changed directions. This path required me to jump a lot more to navigate it, meaning I would lose hunger much faster. If you did not know, on 2x2t, if you run out of hunger, you do die. After wandering for a bit and only losing 1 bar of hunger, I came to the end of the path and found a very open clearing. Although the landscape was mostly destroyed, it seemed much easier to navigate. I crossed a dirt bridge which went over a hole, and was beginning to make it to a large obsidian wall, where I found a few ender chests and a nether portal. I didn't take the nether portal though, as all nether portals that are close to spawn are usually traps, meaning once I went through the portal, it would be blocked by obsidian on the other side, and I would have no way to escape. I accidentally fell through one block hole, and took a lot of fall damage, and did not have a very clear way to get back up. After navigating the cave, I found some dirt blocks, the only blocks I could mine, and I found my way out of the cave, which luckily led me to a hole in the wall, allowing me to continue forward. I was running low on hunger and health, so I decided to take a risk and take another portal. Unfortunately though, it was trapped, but after 5 minutes, the nether portal spit me back into the overworld. It spawned me back at a different place, and I accidentally took some more fall damage. After searching for another path, I found one, and began to travel through another lava cast. After a while though, I got lost in the lava cast as it did not have an actual path, and after climbing some stairs and losing more hunger, I realized that I was running out of options and only had one thing left I could do. I reset my health and my hunger, and my death count goes up to 1. Respawning, I realized it would be better to try to stay in more open areas where I could assess the risk and not get lost as easily. I spawned a bit closer to the outside of 0, 0, and immediately I found a crafting table. I did not know how useful this would be to me, but I picked it up and continued on. Wandering further from the obsidian wall, I continued trying to escape spawn, and eventually found a man-made trench. Luckily, someone who came before me already made a dirt bridge, which I crossed. If I slipped my finger, I could have fallen and been sent back to spawn. After making it across the ravine, I thought my chunks were unloading, but when I got a closer look, I realized there was a much larger chasm. The server did not render the other side, but there was already a few bridges which I could cross. I made my way to the other side and looked back, seeing the full size of the hole. After making it back to the surface, I looked back and saw that the obsidian wall was no longer in sight. After about another minute of walking, I found something very rare at spawn on 2x2t. 1 golden carrot in an item frame to celebrate Easter. It was attached to an ender chest, so I could keep it safe for when I needed more. I also took the item frame just to keep. I knew I was getting close to escaping spawn because I found something that could pass as a man-made structure. It was just a set of stairs, but at the top there's a creeper, and if you didn't know, any mobs spawning on 2x2t is fairly uncommon. I blew up the creeper, then continued onwards. I found yet another trench, but this one seemed to be paved over. And after 2 days of 2x2t, I had finally made it out of spawn. There were not trees yet, but there was grass, which was a good sign. As I left spawn, rain began to fall. The terrain still had no trees and was partially destroyed, but I was almost at a decently safe distance to use another portal without it being a trap, and since each block in the nether is 8 blocks in the overworld, I would be able to get further out much faster. Once I found another portal, I finally entered the nether. When I entered the nether for the first time, I was surprised by how different it looked than a regular world. There's no terrain, just a bright red void. Since the nether has a sort of fog, when you looked off of the platforms, you couldn't see the bottom, nor could you see where you were going. The nether near 0, 0 was just a series of obsidian platforms for me to navigate, with larger paths than smaller paths that connected them. I spotted some wood off of the path and decided to collect it because I did not know if I would be needing it. Right now, my main objective was to get as far away from spawn as possible, where I could actually get some resources. After moving forward just a bit, I found a hallway of trapped nether portals. Including the last nether portal, each nether portal adds 3 blocks, and since each block in the nether is in the overworld, each nether portal is 24 blocks in the overworld, where if you place another portal, you'll get trapped in this hallway. I continued down the path and began to see many signs with the name CodySmile11. This guy actually did comment on one of my previous videos. I got off the main highway and followed a path where I used my 2 wooden blocks to finish the staircase to the next path. I got really lucky here, and I found an enchanted golden apple in an item frame. This is not where my luck would end though, because after walking forward for a bit, I found a double chest, and to my surprise, it was filled with enchanted golden apples, which I could put in my ender chest and used as a food source. After walking only about 100 blocks, I encountered my first player. I didn't know what to expect because this is the first person I've encountered on the server, although I did know that new players were often not welcomed. Knowing he could kill me if he wanted to though, I did not really have a choice, and I approached him. I got lucky this time, and he was friendly. I walked with him for a bit, and he led me to another double chest filled with more enchanted apples. I started traveling a diagonal highway and found some wooden pillars, which I harvested the wood from. By the way, I should say, 2b2t has a lot of advertising in it through withers and posters, so just ignore every link except for the vape.gg/bomb in the top right corner, which gives you 10% off vape before the cheap client I used in the video. After collecting the wood, I followed the person in diamond a bit further, as I assumed he would protect me or lead me somewhere. Unfortunately though, after only a minute or two, he randomly disconnected, and if he didn't have priority queue, that meant he would not be able to log back onto the server for about 6 hours, meaning I would never see him again. I continued to walk, occasionally eating apples for food, until I eventually stumbled upon a furnace, which I used to turn a piece of sand I found into a piece of glass. I didn't have any reason to turn the sand into the glass, but it was something to do for 5 seconds. Because I had been walking for a while, and there was not much to do in the nether besides look at the occasional structures that littered the highway, I decided to go back into the overworld. I wouldn't find any newer terrain though, because I was leaving the nether on the highway, the spots where the majority of people leave. After arriving in the overworld, I found a diagonal path, which I later realized was the overworld highway. By the ocean, I found a door, which opened to the rest of the path, and then I found an island. The island had trees, so I thought I would give it a visit. After getting back to the path, I found a crude tower and a fishing hut with 0 fish. I quickly turned on chest ESP to see if there were any ruins nearby, which led me to the first ruined base I would find on my journey. There was a floor, a broken farm, a couple of torches, and a note block. After checking all the chests to see if anyone left items, I got back to the path. The path continued, cutting through mountains, and leading me to more ruins of old bases. There wasn't anything too big on the highway, but there was well-surviving small settlements that had farms, and would look like a big sandcastle. It was clear not too much had happened in this direction, but there was still a lot of interesting things that I found. I continued down the path until I found a base, which actually had items in a chest for once, which was only a stone pickaxe, but it was more than nothing, as well as a house that was going wheat. I put my name on the message board inside, and continued back on the path. Unfortunately though, I was on a diagonal highway, meaning they don't go as far out as the regular highways, and the path came to an end. I broke some trees to get some wood, and then climbed up the tower to get back into the nether. After climbing up the stairs back to the nether portal, I kept hopping through portals looking for more ruined bases to see if any better armor was left in a grief chest. I did not have any luck though, and after stumbling through about 3 bases, one of the portals teleported me to the nether floor. Luckily though, there was stairs which led me straight back to the highway, but when I was up, I saw a path and decided to follow it. The path led me to absolutely nowhere, then I ended up having to navigate my way all the way back to the nether ceiling again, which was not fun to do. After walking through paths for a while, I found another portal, which led me to an ocean with weird air bubbles. I found an island and decided to mark it as my own. Going down a hole someone left in the island, I found a dungeon and started to mine, looking for more. Unfortunately though, after playing 2b2t for about 2 hours, I made a severe lapse in my judgment, and my death counter is up to 2. Now that I was back at spawn, I was at least closer to stuff that was more interesting, and not out in the middle of nowhere anymore. On Tube 2T, spawn is considered to be anywhere within 2000 blocks of 00. I spawned at negative 1900, meaning I was already very close to escaping. Once I got into the Nether, I realized I should probably start checking some things off my list, like going to 00 in the Nether, because for now it would be too hard to do in the overworld. At 00, I found 2 players fighting and went to get a closer look. When I got the closer look, I died instantly, but I could still check going to 00 off of my list. I wandered around spawn for a bit, climbing to the height limit and looking to see if there was anything I could find. Eventually all I found was a man-made river, which I followed through some tunnels, and eventually I got to the diagonal highway. I followed the highway through a bit, through some more tunnels. I saw some really interesting structures, and I was surprised at how far out of spawn the destruction continued on this highway. Even a lot further out, there were still large structures, like large obsidian cubes, as well as logos of what I assumed to be groups. Once I got out of spawn, I found another portal, but it put me at the nether floor, and after traveling through the tunnel, I realized there was no way for me to get up from here, so I had to go back. After going back, I found a staircase and climbed it, looking to see if there were any chests at the top, but all I found was an obsidian ceiling, which I could not get through. After mining obsidian with my fist for 3 minutes, I made it to the top, and I ran for a while where it was relatively safe. I found a hole and fell back down to the bottom, and after following the highway for a bit, I found a very large nether portal with an ender chest where I could get some enchanted golden apples for food. Now that I had some enchanted golden apples to keep myself from starving, I got back to the nether and began to travel outwards again. After traveling the nether for a bit, I eventually got at a portal and found myself in a very confusing structure. It seemed to be a lava cast, which was strange since I was not at spawn, and I assumed I was at a random location. After traveling through a tunnel, I walked down some stairs and found a large crater. I traveled upwards up a long pathway for a bit, confused at the sheer size of the structure that I was in. After following a tunnel to the outside, I realized how big the structure I was in was and jumped down to the water. After backing up a bit, I saw the scale of the structure I was in and spied a floating island in the distance. After climbing the waterfall, I went into the nether portal and continued outwards. Right now, I was just looking for buildings to document and ended up in a cave. After walking in the cave for a bit, I found another nether portal and found myself in a very inconvenient spot in the nether. After going back through the portal, I found myself in the overworld at the ruins of a base made of stone bricks. There didn't seem to be too much going on, so I went back to the nether, where I struggled to find another nether portal. After mining some soul sand to build up, I went back to the overworld and found yet another ruined base. Instead of going back to the nether, I decided I would travel for a bit, and I found a tall stone tower. After walking past it for a bit, I eventually stumbled upon a wooden path with a bunch of signs, and after following it through a hill, I found my first dead body. It did not have much, and it only had a couple of pieces of wood and a stone pickaxe. I'm not sure how someone could have died out here on the flat terrain, but it did give me some stone tools and an axe, which would be helpful. I found a skeleton, which once again is pretty rare, and I killed it. Unfortunately, it did not drop its enchanted bow. Using a boat to travel, I found another ruined base, and since it was almost completely destroyed, I simply went back to the nether. After traveling for a bit, I found some harming arrows on the ground, which would probably be helpful later, and a yellow shulker, although the shulker was empty. Traveling a bit further, I found my first farm with a full board of signs, and I took some melons for the journey. Moving forward, I found even more melons, and I could continue wandering. After I went back in the nether, I submit to my first destination on the list. One of the most famous bases in Tuba 2T history, the Valley of Wheat. A field that gets griefed as soon as it gets repaired, that lies very close to spawn and very close to the highway at only 14,000 blocks out. I was here just to explore and to see if anyone left anything, and it seemed that there was nothing left. I went to the main building, found some signs and some decorations, but it was mostly just obsidian and cobblestone, and nothing really remained. After navigating through the ruins and making my way around the water, I climbed up a lava cast and made it to one of the obsidian pyramids which was buried underneath. After walking around for a bit and making it a few hundred blocks into the valley, I found a few pieces of wheat which were still growing. There wasn't much wheat, but there still was a bit, which was surprising. After walking past another lava cast, I eventually made it to the X-axis highway, which is what the Valley of Wheat lies on. The Valley of Wheat was constructed to be a place for new players traveling the highway to get food, but due to it being 2T, it is often griefed. I spent a good portion of time traveling through the holes made through lava casts on the highway, passing through some crystal traps being crystals that are upon highways, so people who are auto-running and have crystal aura on accidentally explode themselves. And after running for a while, I stumbled across some signs, as well as some other various structures. After running for a while, I realized how much faster it would be in the Nether, so I went to the Nether. However, while I was getting decently deep into the Nether, I found a sign that had the promise of melons, and since I didn't have any actual food, I decided to follow it. I followed the path for a while and was beginning to lose hope. Eventually, I found a path of what seemed to be blood, which was very concerning, but the prospect of free food was an opportunity that does not come often. After walking another few hundred blocks, I found where the melons began. I didn't know how many of them there were, but I started mining with my fist and soon started mining with my axe because it was much faster. I began to get stacks and stacks of melons, although I did see the melons running out. When I got to the end, I found a sign: go forward to join the communist revolution. Although concerning, getting indoctrinated into communism is a small price to pay for free melons. I would continue. I kept following the path and gaining more melons. Once I got to the point where the melons were harder to mine, I followed them through a portal, hoping there would be more melons on the other side. I spawned in an island where I made it to the end and found a sign stating that I had made it to salvation. Using chest ESP, I saw a chest buried underground and opened it to find one apple. Although this seemed like the end of the path, there was another path that led across the ocean. After following it for a while, I found a massive melon farm as well as a base. I stored my melons away in my ender chest and I looted the chests on the ground. There wasn't much, but there was an anvil and some coarse fruit in the first chest, as well as some shulkers and a diamond axe in the other. I took what I needed and began to look around more. There was a shrine as well as duped dragon eggs pretty much everywhere. I went down in the cave to see what was going on down there, and I found a skeleton farm, as well as an obsidian box, although the button that opened it may have trapped me inside. After I wandered around, I went back to the nether portal and began to backtrack back to the tunnel. Now that I had melons, I had enough food to eat for easily the next 100 days. I walked back the path following the melons and the blood trail, and was on my way to my second location. After walking about 1,000 blocks, I made it to a portal which spawned me above the ocean. I jumped down and put my boat down, and after traveling for a bit, I made it to the griefed crafting table biome. I wasn't sure how much of it was griefed, but unfortunately the only crafting tables that survived were mostly underwater, but there was still a few crafting tables on the ground and a crafting table tree that I could see. After wandering around for a bit and seeing that it was all griefed, I made it back to the Nether. On my way to my third location, I found a chest, and instead of having something useful in it, it had a book which gave me a side quest. The quest was to place signs with the name Cody Smile 11 on it, but since I didn't have any signs, I decided to do the second quest and pass the book along. When I arrived in the overworld, I started walking towards a base that was grief but still standing. After getting inside, there were no stairs anymore, so I towered up with cobblestone, and then I walked to the next floor. Unfortunately, the stairs were flooded, meaning it would be harder to go up them, but eventually I got to the top floor and found a glass dome. Since there is nothing left here, I jumped back down, and after checking the furnaces, I went back to the Nether. After traveling the Nether for a bit, I spawned very low and had to build all the way up to the ground before I realized I was in a mountain. I crossed a cobblestone bridge and found a cobblestone cube overrun with vines. The inside of the structure was very confusing, and there was a lot of water. After mining out through the side, I emerged from the water and took a look. It seemed the rest of the base was destroyed, and I would not be finding anything anytime soon. I was next to a forest though, where I could gather some wood, and after traveling for a bit, I found yet another base. This one had a double chest, although it was empty, and the remains of what looked like a small town. Since there was no nether portal in sight, I used my 7 obsidian and crafted a flint and steel to get back to the Nether. Since I made a new portal, I spawned on the ground, and I had to mine all the way back up to the surface. After I got back on the highway, I ran for a bit and found some more signs. I veered off of the main track for a bit and made the mistake of falling down. I did parkour to get back to the top, but unfortunately, I was a little bit too confident, and I fell to my death. At this point though, I knew how to escape spawn pretty easily, and I just followed a path which took me all the way out. In spawn, I found something very strange and saw a tree, probably the only tree that is in spawn right now. After traveling a path for a bit, I eventually made it to some water, and after climbing for a bit, I made it to the man-made river from earlier, and went to a portal. Going through the portal, I was very close to 0-0 in the Nether, but luckily I was not trapped. I grabbed some melons from my ender chest and saw a man. It was very risky, but he decided not to kill me as he did not see it to be worth it. He gave me 5 golden apples and I continued on my journey. I left along a diagonal path, and when I got to an intersection, I took another portal to the overworld, and there seemed to be some ruins as well as massive lava cast. In the wall, there were some signs, so I added my own. I got into a boat and reached some terrain generation where the ocean level changed, because in a very old update, the ocean level was decreased by 1. Right after, I accidentally sank my boat, but after collecting it, I made it to a ruined base called King of the Hill. I mined some trees and went down into a cave to begin to make some diamond armor. I found a full gold skeleton and killed it with a wooden axe. After going deeper, I found a banner and a furnace and began to look for diamonds. After finding diamonds, I made an iron pickaxe to mine them, and made a diamond chestplate. After finding some more diamonds, I made the rest of my armor set, and while this was happening, someone was messaging me, offering me a free shulker with armor and gear. Since I didn't know if it was a trap or not, I put my armor in my ender chest, and began my journey to the coordinates he sent me. After traveling through the Nether, I found an anime woman on a piece of paper. I made it to the coordinates, and found the man who messaged me, and as a token of gratitude, I gave him the map art I found, and went back into the Nether. In the Nether, I put on my new armor, and found out it wasn't maxed armor, but it was still pretty good armor. After going back into the Nether, I tried to fight a ghast, but I failed to fight the ghast and instead went to a hole. Since I was down low, I decided to test my Elytra because I had not used Elytra in quite some time. After that, I went back to the overworld and I found a diagonal path where I flew around a bit to another ruined base. At the ruined base, I found some chests and a farm, although the farm had no crops. I looked around a bit and didn't find anything interesting, so I went back to the Nether, and since I spawned lower, I used my new pickaxe to mine back to the highway. Since I had my Elytra, I want to fly around at 00 to get a better view of the whole thing, and to get to the actual coordinates 00, rather than being close to them in spawn. As I was going to 00 in the Nether, I saw a player and didn't think much of it, but as I went to light my portal to get into the overworld, suddenly, a crystal was placed on top of me and I broke my only totem. My heart was racing because I haven't had any actual conflicts like this yet on 2v2t, but seeing as how fast I lost health, I could die at any second. Since I had pearls, I could run away pretty easily, although it was still very scary. He didn't really have any way to catch up to me though, so eventually he stopped chasing me. Once I felt I was safe, I looked around a bit, and I could finally ignite a portal to return to the overworld. I spawned on the bridge from earlier, and wandered around for a bit. After I remembered that I have Elytra, I took flight, and I flew around lava cast and ruins, and even saw a few trees. The Elytra got me a lot of distance, and I flew in between lava cast and through some holes in the walls. I also saw some vines that were placed by players, as well as redstone blocks, which people use to ignite TNT from above to destroy large areas at a time. The goal right now was to make it to 00 in the overworld, pretty much just because I want to make a house. Obviously the house would get griefed, but I still thought it would be funny. As I flew, I got closer to 00, and I hit a massive wall of water that I wasn't sure what was. I climbed the wall and began to swim forward to 00. I soon realized that there was something inside of the water. It was hard to tell what it was because it was really low down, but whatever it was too big to fit into my render distance. As I got closer, I revealed more of the build, and it was way bigger than I first thought. At spawn on Tube2T, there are a ton of buildings of aquatic creatures that can be griefed because of the difficulty of getting through the water to be able to grief them. I passed a giant seal and began to make my way to the next building. After I swam for a bit and revealed more, I made it to a platform where I wouldn't have to swim. I found a skeleton horse, although I didn't have a saddle, so I could not ride it. I moved forward, finding even more builds. I was even more surprised that any build at all could survive at spawn, but I continued on. Some of the platform was waterlogged, so I built a boat to better navigate. When I got close to 00, I found some wool, which I collected. Wool is very hard to get as there are not many sheep on the server, or too many cobwebs to get string to make wool, and I need wool to make beds. So after getting some wool, I put in my e-chest, and ran a bit further to a box that was at 00. I found the portal room, and after that, I found the exact coordinates 00. I began to build my house with wood and cobblestone. I was on the clock though, because if any player came through the portal, they would probably kill me, and I would have no way out as I used all of my fireworks getting spawn. Building the house only took me about 5 minutes, and I ran out of cobblestone for the roof, but I did put a furnace, a crafting table, and a bed, and since I ran out of cobblestone, I finished the roof with netherrack. I put a banner and sign on the outside of my house, and so I didn't get killed, I left my house to complete my next task, traveling the southern canal. I left 00 and began to follow a cobblestone path over the water cube. I jumped around a pillar, and after I ran a bit further, I made it to the edge, where I built up the wall and used my elytra to get closer to the beginning of the canal. I flew along the side of the wall and below the obsidian ceiling, and made over a few lava casts, and flew through an obsidian wall. As I got closer to the ground, I finally made it to the beginning of the canal, where there were no walls, but there was the water. Since I was now on the ground, I could use my boat, and I did for a bit before I got to a section where the canal was griefed. My boat sank a few times, and eventually I made it to a tunnel section, but there was another wall of water. After climbing to the top, I swam next to the lava cast, and at the end, I put my boat back down. I made it further until I made to a very small tunnel that ended halfway through. Since the tunnel ended, I tried mining for a bit, then eventually I picked up my boat and just swam the rest, trying not to drown. The next section was completely mined out, so I could continue forward. I went through the tunnel and made it to a section where the walls began. I was still surrounded by lava casts and obsidian, and there were a few blockages, but I could continue boating for a greater distance. I made it to a wall covered in vines, and was getting much further from spawn. The next thing I saw was a lava cast covered in obsidian writing, and I made it to the 4K milestone, but it was griefed beyond recognition. The next section was cut through a hill and looked pretty cool. There was more water blocking the path, but after I got through, I found the 5K milestone, which is the biggest build I've seen on the server so far. It was a massive obsidian statue of Atlas from Greek mythology, and I want to get a better look, so I got off of the trail and backed up to see it in full view. After I got back onto the canal, I was met by more flooded paths. After struggling through for a few minutes, I made it to the other side and traveled through a hollowed out lava cast where the obsidian walls were replaced by melon crops, although there were no melons and there were only stems. After traveling the melon path for only a few hundred blocks, I was met with an absolute monolith of a structure blocking the path, and on top of that, it was covered in water. When I got a closer look, I realized the water was only on the edge, and I could continue on my boat as the majority of the tunnel was already mined out. Making it through, I was next to another lava cast, and when I looked upwards, I saw a sky art made of obsidian, but render distance on Tube 2T is not high enough for me to see all of it, although it did seem impressive. Making it to a tower of water, I found another rack and a glass hut with some signs, and I deposited some of my melons as well as some apples, and then moved through the water. As I continued, I passed more massive obsidian structures, including a dragon, on the side of the water. Going through the hill, I saw Greg Heffley, and going even further, I saw part of one of the larger sky arts, as well as a pig in a hat. I traveled through a really long lava cast filled with melon plants, and made all the way to the 10K milestone, where I found a hut that used to have cookies. I put some food in, and I continued. A large portion of the path was blocked, so I traveled on the side for a bit. The 12.5 thousand milestone was fully griefed, but you could see that there used to be a very large structure. After going forward for a bit, I found one block of quartz on the ground, and made it to the most annoyingly griefed section of the canal. After struggling out, I made it to an obsidian outpost, which I explored and found nothing. After purling back onto the path, I found another traveler and continued with them for a bit since they were friendly. I passed a bridge labeled SCA and found a hole in the wall with a sign mentioning free coal in a furnace. The sign next to that stated that there's no coal left, and the final sign stated that there was no longer a furnace. Now that I had traveled for a while, I received a message confirming what I thought, and I need to go back to spawn to do the thing. I knew most end portals on 2b2t were griefed, but I had learned that a few remained, and Hermetic Lock sent me a list of the remaining portals. So I got back into the Nether and went to find them. I was met with a wither and decided to fight it because I didn't want to just keep walking after so long, and after a quick fight, I had another star. After I traveled back to 00, I went to the portal. I went to a portal that was on an axis, as it would be easiest to find and was the most popular end portal. After getting to the bedrock floor, I searched the coordinates, but unfortunately I could not find the portal. I may have gotten the coordinates wrong, but I do not think this portal exists anymore, so I would have to find another portal. After leaving spawn, I went back to the Nether to try a new set of coordinates. I spawned near lava and looked up at the highway, knowing I had to build back up with netherrack. After I built back up with netherrack, I began the journey to the Nether coordinates, where the portal would be near in the overworld. After gathering some obsidian, to create a portal, I set off on the cobblestone path that went away from the main highway to get to the coordinates. After crossing another obsidian highway, I continued on the stone path, and after reaching a turn, I activated my Elytra since I was getting close. After flying to an obsidian road, I reached the portal that seemed to be the gateway to the end portal. I arrived in the overworld, and since the landscape was so griefed, so many blocks out, I knew I was in the right spot. I peered down at the lack of ground below me, and I saw the portal frame. Since I was far away, I couldn't tell if the portal was ignited or not, but it wasn't fully griefed. I prepared my Elytra and glided down through the rubble, slowly descending into some water. Then, after turning the corner, I saw it. I saw the end portal, and although I didn't know what to expect, I put my sign down and I entered. I immediately found myself in an obsidian box with 2 roads leading outwards, and after I exited, I found a bedrock floor covered in obsidian writing, water, and fire. I believe the floor was put in place by Housemaster so the end would be playable, as the server would grief any ground otherwise. I ate some melons for hunger, then used my Elytra to get to the floor. I found myself on top of 2 obsidian words in between 2 large walls of cobblestone. I began to make my way to the cobblestone, looking at the pillars. That is when I saw a person. I knew that if he wanted to fight, I wouldn't have an out because nether portals don't work in the end, and I would have nowhere to run, assuming he had fireworks. Most players I've met on the server so far have been friendly, so I approached him. I assumed if he attacked me, I would be able to at least try to run, but it seems I was mistaken. He walked up to me, and I was dead. I may look stupid for having just stood there, but since he had fireworks, the fight was over before it even started. I spawned in a stone box deep underneath spawn and followed a path to the bottom of a pond where I could swim to the surface. I made my way to my ender chest to get my backup gear, and I equipped it. I used my wood to make a wooden pickaxe, and I put my shulkers away. Just then, I saw out of the corner of my eyes a green firework. I wasn't sure what it was, but then I was hit, and I fell to the ground. I jumped off of a cliff aiming for the water, but unfortunately, I could not make it. When I respawned, I only took wood out of my ender chest, and since the portal I found was lower down, I knew it wouldn't be a trap, because when I entered the portal, I wouldn't be at the top of the nether where all the traps are. After entering the nether, I opened my ender chest and took some more wood. I saw a player flying around and was scared, but they didn't attack, and I built back up to the highway and ran through 0-0 back in the direction of the end portal. I ran across paths and made my way to an obsidian tunnel. I followed another cobblestone path, and after following it for a while, I eventually found the obsidian path from before, although I could not reach it this time without Elytra. I made it to a portal about 100 blocks away in the nether, meaning I would be about 800 blocks away when I reached the overworld. I harvested some wood and used the wool from earlier to make a bed. I set my spawn, but didn't realize I didn't set properly because it has to be night to set spawn. I got into a boat and traveled to the crater with the end portal, where I used the water to get down. After I spent some time looking for the portal, I eventually found it again, where I entered equipped with only a few pieces of wood as well as some food. This time I stayed on the path and followed it to the wall of cobblestone. I followed the tunnel till the path was more destroyed, when I built upwards and followed the path, looking around. Eventually, I made it to a remaining piece of endstone, and I climbed and saw an abandoned structure. It was really high up, but I also saw a path that went outwards and decided to follow it. Unfortunately, I did not account for the 1 block hole in the path, and I died for my 5th time. As I made it back, I found 2 shulker shells in a furnace, and I made a new bed. I made my way over the river and began to mine some cobblestone to make a pickaxe so I could start mining iron and have enough armor to kill endermen when I made far enough out. I made my stone pickaxe and mined some more, and then made it to the crater. I made my way down the side and mined some more iron ore. As I descended, I gained more iron and eventually made it to the bedrock floor. I mined into a wall and found a room that was abandoned a while ago, so I patched up the wall and finally set my spawn. I mined into the wall and placed my furnaces, where I began to smelt my iron. I had enough for a helmet, boots, and a chestplate, as well as an iron pickaxe, and now that my spawn was set, I was ready to enter the end for the 3rd time. This time, I went the other direction, and found one of the glitch crystals hovering above the portal that I could use to return. I wandered around the main island for a bit, and then I found the highway, where I could get far enough out that I could find an unlooted end city. I got further out, and began to see old obsidian structures as well as lava cast, and I got to a section of the highway where it went through a lava cast and was a tunnel for a very long time. After a longer time than you would think, I made it to the other side, and I continued running as the lava cast got smaller behind me. I noticed the bedrock path and obsidian ring was still here, and I ran for a while more and found more cobblestone and obsidian. I still hadn't reached any end islands, but a bit further out, I found the first water grief, and I swam over it. It went on for a while, so I followed the path on top, and after a while, it shifted from cobblestone to gold ore, then to obsidian. I kept running, and nothing besides the floor changed for a while, until I saw a chest. I I climbed up the stairs to see the chest, and it was empty, so I went back to the path. After I made it to the path, I found a path that went right inside of a lava cast that had stone bricks on the ceiling. I followed it and eventually looped back, but after making it further, I saw some cracked ice, meaning that the water used to actually be ice generated with pistons and a frostwalker boot. After running a bit further, I made it to what barely passes as a 5k milestone, being a sign with a chair, where I took a short rest. I put my furnace down because it looked like a TV, and at the real 5k milestone, 2 ice paths went in both directions. Even though the floor could have been destroyed, I got on my boat and traveled the path. To place my boat, I made an iron bucket and placed water, so I could place the boat. Boats travel ridiculously fast on ice, and soon I made it to where I could see the end islands. I passed my first end island, and then my first end city. The city was obviously looted already, because it was within 5,000 blocks of spawn, and after I reached 5,000 blocks out, I realized this was a ring road going around the 5k border, so I got in my boat. When I went back on the main path, the path was damaged, so I went below, but after running for a bit, I realized the ice path wasn't melted anymore, so I started bowing out and passed the sign. As I got further out, the path started to go over end islands as well as old buildings. About 19,000 blocks out, the path was griefed, but some people repaired it and put some signs down, which I read. There wasn't much out here other than the occasional blockage in the path, and I was beginning to wonder if I would find anything. Eventually, the ice began to melt, and the path was becoming water, but it was still travelable because boats can go on water as well. At about 40,000 blocks out, I found another repair with some more signs, but there wasn't really much to see. Eventually, the path deteriorated all the way to endstone and obsidian, and my boat no longer served any purpose. I traveled far through the water and made it to the 50,000 milestone, a rest stop with trees and signs. I read a few signs and looked around and placed my own sign. I took the banner and continued along the path. There was a lot of water, so I began to take my boat forward, evading the void and trying to get further out. After traveling only a bit further, I reached the end of the path. I was at the point where most players stopped, but to get to the unlooted end cities, I would have to travel a bit further out, so with only my iron pickaxe, I began to mine endstone to bridge deeper into the end. As I began to go out, I followed a path of a previous explorer and traveled up the islands and across wind paths, getting deeper into the end and closer to the unexplored. I mined some chorus plants and began to travel across one of the bigger islands. I spotted a square of grass, and I continued onward. I made it to the edge of the island and fought some endermen, and didn't realize how weak my armor was, so they did 4 hearts a hit. After a close encounter with death, I clutched with some water and ate my gapple. Reaching the corner of the island, I found a banner, and I realized I would have to get further out on my own now. I began to bridge towards a flowing piece of endstone, where I began to mine to get further out. After bridging further out, I made it to another man-made bridge, and with an end chest, I got my materials. I continued to run outwards across the islands and across the bridges, making it further from any sign of human intervention. After traveling for a few minutes, I made it to the first end city, about 52,000 blocks out, although this one was already looted. I looked around the city and continued to move outwards. I fought more endermen, almost dying again, and I began the long process of mining endstone to build my own bridge. After a couple of cycles of mining and building, my iron pickaxe broke and I was reduced to only wood. After struggling to create my bridge, I made across and jumped to the next island with a bucket of water, where I was pretty low down. I climbed up and spotted an end gateway and began making my way across this island towards the next. When I got to the edge, I built only a bit further and made it to my final island, where after I climbed up the edge, making it to the top, I saw my first unlooted end city, about 53 or 54,000 blocks out. I broke the window and began to climb up the stairs, but I was not prepared to fight the 10 shulkers, so instead I started chugging gapples to out-heal them, and slowly levitating upwards towards the chests. When I made it to the top, I looted the chests, and was immediately stacked with diamond tools and a full set of enchanted armor. I jumped down with water and began to make my way to the second set of chests, and after finding my way up, a glitch caused some of the chests to be broken, so I gathered the loot off of the floor and continued upwards to the roof. I looted the last chests and floated above the roof, but since I placed wire on the side, I used it to get back down safely. I traveled deeper into the end, and decently soon I found my second end city. I fought my way up the tower and gathered even more broken chests, and having almost a full set of diamond armor by now, I opened my ender chest to store some of the extra items. I had what I needed, but I decided to keep going because I still wanted to find Elytra, and I could only find Elytra from cities that spawn ships. I started bridging deeper into the end, and getting blocks was easier now since instead of a wood pickaxe I had efficiency 4 diamond or efficiency 5 iron to use. I traveled across the island and started bridging out more, and after bridging for a while and traveling a few hundred blocks over the islands, I found my third end city. I climbed up, gathering even more loot, and eventually I made it to where I could bridge up to the ship, while the shulkers levitated me upwards. I levitated very high up, but it was okay since I had already put wire down, and I finally entered the ship and got my Elytra. Now that I had what I came for, I could descend to the ground and figure out what to do next. I made a tiny hut for people to find if they ever come this far out, but now that I was leaving the end, I had to put my items in my ender chest. I climbed up the end city and found the ender chest, and after making a new shulker, I stored away all of my items. Now that my items were away, instead of traveling 50,000 blocks, I simply jumped. I respawned in my bed and made my way through the crater looking for an ender chest where I got my gear back out. After cleaning up my house and taking my furnaces, I ignited another portal and entered the Nether. I built up to a fancy staircase which led me to the highway, and I ran down the highway for a while taking in the scenery. I was off to complete my last task, setting my spawn 100,000 blocks in the overworld. When I made it near 100,000 blocks, I took another portal to the overworld, and after traveling the melon path along the ocean, I reached the 100,000 block milestone for the first time, and I went back to the Nether to follow some tunnels. I began to dig my own tunnels, and eventually found a portal which led me to an abandoned farm. I traveled through the forest, it being the first natural terrain I'd seen in my journey, and I went back to the Nether to travel faster. I traveled through untouched Nether terrain, and after building around and finally making it to the overworld, I arrived at my last ruined base, where I spent a while exploring, looking at the tunnels and railways as well as what remained, and harvesting materials to make my own house with. After I spent a decent amount of time discovering the base, I made it to the edge, and after moving just a bit further out, I used my weird assortment of materials to make a little hut where I set my spawn and placed my chest. I put my boat on the water and traveled across the ocean to a small island with a chunk error, and as the sun set on my final day, I was finished.